All right, we'll get started here in a couple minutes. We'll get people logged in. And if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us where you're from, my name is Greg Undo. I'll be the host for the Hangout today. I'm presenting from Northern Virginia area in Washington, D.C., just outside D.C. And if you want to go ahead and just introduce yourself, tell us where you're from. At that point, we could also, if you have comments that you want answered, if you're watching it live, we could enter it in the comments field. I'll just mute my monitoring laptop. We'll take a look. If you're watching this offline, you may want to fast forward a couple minutes while we collect questions and get people logged in. All right, so we have Ukraine, Germany, London. So we have Omaha, Nebraska, Toronto, beautiful city. All right, so we have India, Maryland, Italy, Los Angeles, Nova Scotia, Columbia. All right, so we have Israel, So once again, if you're watching this offline, you may want to fast forward to about 10 minutes while we collect questions and get everyone logged in. It's always super helpful. I know in the past we've had some people have done indexes of the different hangouts, so like what questions were covered at different times. So if anyone wants to kind of keep a running index that we could put in the comments field, that would be super helpful for people watching it afterwards. All right, so New York, Romania, we have Dubai, South Korea, Pine Grove, Pennsylvania. Good to see you, Taylor. France, Russia, France, and Atlanta. We have Ghana. We have someone from the dark side of the moon. So that could be our longest distance attendee. So we're seeing a question about CC 121. So if I could comment on that, is Steinberg going to be building more controllers? You know, they're always investigating stuff with our parent company, Yamaha. So the CC 121 is kind of a highly functional controller. If you're not familiar with it, it's like a single fader with transport and AI knob, and also 12 encoders for EQ or sends and quick controls. So that's very useful for a lot of different things. So nothing that's kind of they're always doing research and development in it. So, but also we've just announced compatibility with the SoftTube console. So that's been updated, I believe, from the SoftTube side to work with 9.5 as of today. So that's another great controller option that's available. But I'm sure, we also have the full range of Nuage controllers. I realize that could be out of the budget for a lot of people, but that offers pretty stunning compatibility as well. Okay, so we'll do some groove templates. All right, and once again, if you have questions, feel free to kind of ask them in the comments field, and we'll get those copied over. All right, so we have a question just kind of came in about using or opening up Cubase SX projects in Cubase Elements 9.5. So the file format should work. There could be the possibility of some functions in if you had a higher version, that some of those functions may not be applicable in Cubase Elements if there's a reduction of feature set. But for the most part, you should be in good shape. All right, so England, we have Sacramento. We have Philadelphia. Right, we're just copying over some questions for people that are coming. And again, if you have questions, please feel free to ask it in the comments field. Okay, we're collecting more questions. Again, please feel free to ask your questions in the comments field. All right, copying over some more questions. We'll get started here in just a couple minutes. Thanks everyone for wonderful questions. All right, so we have more questions coming in. We'll get started in just a couple minutes. All right, so seeing a question, is there a Nuendo 8.5? The latest version of Nuendo is currently 8.1. All right, so we're seeing a question about what about integration with iPad and Cubasis. You can export your Cubasis projects directly into Cubase. All right, lots of questions coming in. We'll just get these copied over and we'll get started. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. We have some questions, and let me just change the size of the font so I could read it a little easier in my text document. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So we had a question. I got a call last week from Peter Frampton, who had a question I wanted to share with you guys. And he wanted to know if there was a quick way of just auditioning like an effects channel with just the effects channel and not the source material. So you had two questions. So the first one we'll take a look at is going to be, let's say, we'll listen to this. You wished it all away. So when I solo the effects return channel, what we're going to hear is the original source blended in with the reverb. So if I come here, and I'm left here for 1,000 years and a day. So that's a combination of the original source track combined with that signal being blended in with the effects channel return and into our send. Now, as we work on this, one of the things that you'd want to do is in the audio connections or your VST connections, depending which version, is make sure that you have the control room activated. So you want to add a monitor, and at that point we could just kind of send that through what's called the audition bus. So if I wanted to listen to the reverb without the original source material, you have this little button in the mix console that's L for, and that will send it to the listen bus. So if I now wanted to listen to it, I could just click on this L. And that's only the reverb isolated, the reverb return channel without the original material. So when you click on solo, I hear the original track that's going to be soloed. But clicking on the L button instead, that way I only hear what's actually going on in that effects return channel without the original signal being blended in. Now, the second question he had for me was how to actually print the effects return channel for a particular track. And I think he was doing this for one of his guitar parts. So excuse me one second. We'll just kind of hide this. And so if we wanted to print that reverb, there's a couple of different ways. One is you could solo a particular track, and if you wanted to go to your export audio mix down, here we could just say I wanted to just have the revelation. We could enable the, I could come right here and just say I wanted to have only the revelation exported and have that imported directly back into a project. And what he wanted to do is actually kind of more of an old analog console paradigm where we could just take the effects return channels that were on a console and print those to tape. So I will scroll down to my effects return channels here. I think we can see our revelation return channel. And what I could do is I could add an audio. I wanted to add, let's say, a group track. And you could do this with a group channel, and I'm going to make it a stereo group track. And we'll just create it outside a folder, and that will go. So we'll have our group here. And what I want to do is to take this particular effects end, so our effects return channel, and I'm going to go to my sends. And I want to send it out of, we'll say, group 4, which is our group that we just created. And now what I want to do is to add a stereo audio track. And I'll just move this. And what I want to do is to have this input be from our group 4. So what we're doing is taking the effects return channel, we're sending it out to a group and taking that group as an input directly here. So now as I just hit record on this particular channel, we can now just hear the particular reverb. So let's make sure that my group isn't muted. So at this point, if I have everything set up, you could just kind of play. And I'll just take this off to listen.
You say you wished it all away, and I'm left here for 1,000 years.
And this, when we listen to it, if I did everything correctly, will just be, that's just a reverb, completely isolated, and you could just record that in real time if you wanted to. So that's a kind of a great way that, you know, some people are used to working with, you know, printing the effects directly on the tape. And once you do that, it's not going to take any CPU resources, and you could have it completely isolated. And you could also do stuff. Some people will do creative stuff, like some fun 80s stuff, where I could now just go to my audio. If I wanted to do like a reverse reverb, at this point, I could just select that, do a reverse on the reverb, and as we play this back, so kind of a common tactic that some people would use on snare tracks. So instead of having to record it onto tape backwards and flip the tape, you could just do that. So kind of a cool trick that Peter had asked. I just wanted to share with you guys. So let me look at some other questions that are coming in. Okay, so we had a question regarding dealing with every time that someone wanted to record a particular or edit a particular MIDI event. You know, there's a number of different ways. So let's say if I wanted to look at a particular MIDI event here. So let's say I go to the string part, and let's say this string part has multiple MIDI continuous controllers. So let's say there's modulation, and perhaps we wanted to switch this to expression. Let's say for a string part, so we're going to have, let's say modulation. Let's do volume control. And when we come here, you could also just, you know, if you want to do MIDI panning, we could have that set up. So now sometimes you may be moving knobs on your controller and not actually hear and not be aware of what controllers there are. And if you go to the lower left-hand corner, you can click directly on a particular icon here. So if you just click here, one of the functions that you could do is to just say show used controllers, and that would open up all of the controllers that are going to be used in that particular part. Now the question was if there was a way to have that automatically show every time. Now I think that once you have opened up those controllers for that particular project, let me just come here, and let's say on our piano we wanted to just look at perhaps sustain messages. So if I go back directly to my quartet and we look at it in our editor, and what they wanted to do is to have this automatically always show the used controllers. So I don't know of a way to have that automatically done, but one of the things that you can do is that could be triggered from a keyboard shortcut. So if you don't want to have to go and find that particular you know, icon on a big screen, if you go to under MIDI, you could assign your own keyboard shortcut for show used controllers. And if you wanted to, you could have it as a macro so that you could launch the key editor and then have it automatically launch the show used controllers as well, so that every time you hit, like, you know, Control or Command E, that it would automatically open the editor and show the used controllers. But I don't know of a way to have that automatically. You could store this as a preset if you wanted to, but I don't know a way to have it automatically always show used controllers by default. But I'll pass that on as a feature request. All right, so we had a question on transport behavior. And the question is kind of regarding what happens when you hit stop. So I'm just going to reread the question here. Okay, so to go back to the beginning of a locator selection. So if you wanted to, and again, you can just, I believe it's one of the key commands. I think it's maybe play from selection. So here you could actually have a key command, and this is going to be, I believe, under transport, where you could just have it say play from selection start. So you could just simply have that automatically play directly from this, if I have a part selected, let's say, for instance, if I come directly here and I have that part selected, that you want to have it automatically just change, so when you hit play, that it would play directly from the selected event from the start of that. So you can set up your own keyboard shortcut for that, and you could do something like, a good key command would be maybe a modifier like, Alt or Option and spacebar to toggle that behavior, or the arrow keys and spacebar. So you can set up your own key command directly for that function as well. We had a question sent in about doing post-processing. So one of the things that you could do directly inside of Cubase is there's several different ways of kind of communicating with other programs, whether it's a Steinberg program or not. So if we go to our export audio mixdown, one of the things that people often miss is the capability of where we do a post process. So when I click here, if I wanted my program to automatically when I have my song, it's all ready to be mixed, I could have it go directly into Wavelab Pro 9 or to Wavelab Pro 9.5, or if I wanted to upload it to SoundCloud. So at this point, if I did just a quick mix, I could, if I have the post process activated, at that point it would automatically load that project directly into Wavelab 9.5, and I could do my mastering and CD assembly directly inside of Wavelab. And one of the great things is there's actually kind of a two-way communication. So let's say maybe at the mastering stage, you determine that maybe the hi-hats were a little too loud, and it's best to actually solve the problem directly with not just in the mastering stage, but more at the mixing stage. You could then, from within Wavelab, choose to you say, open up the project that this file was created from, and that will open up the Cubase project so that it will automatically open up the project, and you could just make that tweak and just simply go back and forth. So there's a direct two-way communication with the post-process functionality. So again, to do that, go to your File menu, go to Export, Audio Mixdown, and in the bottom you see the post-processing, and at that point you could just have it automatically go to different programs. All right, so we'll go through some more questions that were kind of sent in. All right, so we had a question about kind of using lanes. So let's go ahead and take a quick look at this. I'll just do a new empty project. All right. So just restart my Cubase here real quick. Hit the wrong button. All right, so, and the question was about, as working with lanes, if we have, why there's an empty lane. So we'll just try a new project here. So we'll add an audio track. So I'm going to just open up the lane. So when you start, you always have kind of a blank lane. And I'll just kind of do a quick cycle record. Let me just enable the recording on this part. And as you can see, it's always going to kind of add one blank lane. And I think the intention is that you could always, once it's kind of being recorded, this way it allows you to kind of give you an extra space to work with, or if you wanted to drag an audio file in, that at this point you could just, okay, I just want to take this particular file and put it into the loop without, because I don't think there's a way to automatically add a lane. So it kind of, I think the intention is, since you can't choose to add a lane, it always gives you an extra one as kind of a fail safe to work with. So it's, you know, it's probably not the end of the world having an empty blank lane, because you could always just kind of close it. But I think since the lanes are kind of automatically created, that it kind of gives you an extra area in case you wanted to, you know, move tracks to different lanes, if you wanted to, so that you had a little more flexibility and you weren't kind of constrained or restricted from different editing tasks. Now, another question that was mailed in was if there was just a way to, let's say if we have a particular audio file here, I'll just close the lanes. And I don't remember this function, but maybe someone else can. If there's a modifier key from the selection tool to play back a particular range of notes, I don't remember a modifier key for that other than switching to the play tool, you know, which is going to be, you know, the 9 key on your computer keyboard. So if you wanted to just have that automatically carry over there from the object selection tool. So I don't remember a modifier key that would actually switch this to, if you hold down like the Alt key, it'll turn it into like a scissors tool. You know, Shift key for kind of multiply selecting events. But I don't remember a modifier key that would start to trigger playback of the file, but I could be mistaken. But if anyone else remembers a modifier key working that way in a project window, just let me know in the comments, and we'll see if we can make sense of it. All right, so we'll move on with some of the other questions. Okay. All right, so we had a question sent in about being able to apply, like on a MIDI track, how to apply particular MIDI modifier settings and to write those files. So let's say if I have a MIDI track here, I'll just create kind of an empty blank part. Okay, I'll just turn that synchronization off real quick. So let's say I had a number of different notes. Just switch this to all on a particular pitch. And the question was dealing with what they wanted to do is in the particular MIDI track, they had the MIDI modifiers directly here transposed so they could switch keys this way. And what we see is these modifiers will affect the playback values of particular notes. So these notes will still stay the same. So if you go into a direct, if you go into the notation editor, it's going to show what the original notes were versus what's been applied through our different MIDI modifiers here. And this also kind of goes for MIDI plugins, etc. So if I wanted to take my transposition that I quickly did here for a particular MIDI track and embed it so that it's actually not just processing it on playback, but instead actually altering it to represent these values, I would just go to my MIDI menu, and then we have what we call freeze MIDI modifier. So as soon as I hit this, you'll notice that the MIDI notes will actually go down to reflect that change. And now we see the transpose has been reset to 0. So again, if I just kind of undo that function, we see our transposition of -6 semitones. And then we have these notes on an E flat. As soon as I go to my MIDI menu to freeze MIDI modifiers, those events have now been changed directly, and the MIDI modifier settings have been kind of reset. So that way you could actually kind of embed or actually change the particular MIDI data that's been selected directly from your inspector settings. So it's a pretty easy way to apply those things. So now when you go into the score editor, it would reflect the key that you're hearing as opposed to just being a processed real-time transposition. All right, so we had a question about how to kind of do a quick humanization of particular files. So let's go ahead and I'll just do, let's say I just want to do kind of a Groove Agent part here. We'll just do the Groove Agent SE. And let me just load up a particular kit. Okay, so I'm just going to load up Quick Kit. And let's say if I just wanted to build a quick drum pattern with this. Sorry, that blew up someone's headphones. So what I want to do now is I'm just going to go to my MIDI insert here, and we'll go to our beat designer. And let's say I just wanted to now play back Okay, and let's just throw in, let's say, just a quick hi-hat here. So let's say this would be, I'll just kind of tweak some of my velocities here. So let's say, and let's just throw in just a very subtle. All right, so let's say I wanted to now we'll just kind of put this pattern directly on. So I wanted to import it into the project at the cursor. So now we have this drum pattern that's embedded. I can now turn this off. So let's say just, and I wanted to make this a little more human. So let's say I'll just slow it down just a little bit so it's less annoying to everyone. All right, so let's say I just come here. And let's just loop this. So let's say I just wanted to make this sound a little more realistic, a little more human. And this is what one of the other plugins can allow you to do. It's called a quantizer plugin. So let's say, so what I could do now is just, there's a swing factor here. So that's taking like a pretty, you can almost think of this as being very suburban, and now you can kind of get a little more urban, if you will. And again, when we look at this part directly on, let's say we wanted to look at this in a drum editor. And let's say at this point, we just wanted to only show drum sounds with events. So if you wanted to, now at this point, let's just say, to apply that swing directly into the drums. Again, if I just go to my freeze play parameters, so let's just look at it here in our large drum editor. Let's see if I did everything correctly. Okay, let me just. Okay, so if we now wanted to just kind of take that and make those changes permanent, I would again just go directly to my freeze play, my freeze MIDI modifiers, and now you can see that those MIDI notes have actually been changed to have that swing feel. And again, if you just wanted to undo that, let's select. So again, that's just a quantizer plugin. So you could actually kind of play very easily with different feels, again, without modifying the original MIDI parts. So if you have like a beat that you just want it to be a little more Teddy Riley than like, 96 PPQ 1985 feel, you could apply that very easily. Now there's another question kind of related to this, and since we're here, is let's say if you wanted to have a particular drum loop, let me just check my audio connections here really quick. Sorry about that. Yeah, let's get this configured here. So now if I wanted to have a particular drum fill, which is fine. So let's say it's something like that has a particular feel to it, and I wanted to have You could see that Cubase has automatically kind of done hit point detection, as the file is imported or as the file has been recorded. And if you wanted to kind of capture the feel of this particular file, all you'd have to do is you could double click, and from within the sample editor, once you go to kind of your hit points, so you could adjust kind of your hit point threshold here. But if you say create groove, so you can say that this file name is 0290 BPM dry, and then what I'm going to do is now create groove. So if I wanted to apply the feel of this to this MIDI part, all you'd have to do is, once I go to my quantize setup, and you can see this is now your quantize preset. So once you kind of click here, you could actually just say, okay, you could have kind of this actual feel from this drum loop, and I could apply that feel directly to this particular MIDI event. So as soon as I come here, I click on quantize, this drum pattern that I've just done is extracted the groove directly from this, and now it's applied it to that particular file. So that's another way that you can kind of get realistic feels to make something that was a little stricter rhythmically, a little more stiff, to make it groove a lot. So some really great tools to be able to really make the drums come to life. All right, so we had a question about pre-delay on an insert. So let me just open up another. Let's just do kind of a ballad so we can hear the reverb a little more prominent. Okay, so let's say we have kind of like a reverb on the voice and the piano part. So we'll just get some of the samples to load up here. And let's say we'll just go ahead and listen to it just a little bit.
You stare at the ground, not a sound. Tell me why something's wrong. You can't go on.
All right, so a lot of times why you use pre-delay is when you're doing this in a reverb, what you want to do is, let's say, if it takes a little while for the reverb to kick in, what you want to do is to basically just do a pre-delay. Let's see if we could actually, we'll just solo the voice and kind of play with the pre-delay a bit. But this allows you to kind of get into a different part of the hall so that you can have like some better intelligibility with the voice. So we'll just solo the voice with the we'll go to kind of an extreme amount.
How can I feel you? How can I see you when you run and hide from the light? Be someone tonight.
So basically what you can do is kind of, just pre-delay, where the reverb starts so that perhaps it's not going to lose intelligibility. And it can really vary per song, per project. So kind of play around with it, but that's kind of really the intention. And I think there's a second part to the question. Let me just reread it. All right, and the question was how to do this with like an instrument track. So, you could do this. And sometimes what I see people do also, if you go to a particular instrument track, some people will come here and, just on the instrument track itself, set up, and you would just set it up like, okay, I want this to go out to the reverence as well. Now, what I've seen some people do, and I know like Michael Wagner, who's a wonderful engineer, uses a trick with compressors. I've seen some people apply to reverbs as well, when they want the reverb to be, to react a bit earlier, is they could just duplicate the particular track and kind of send, I think if you send this to no bus, but here you could actually just take that particular track and pre-delay the track by milliseconds. So I know some people do this and still send it out to the reverb, and I think it still goes out to the reverb. So let me just see if we do this. So this way you could have that particular track, and we'll hear the vocal. And it's pretty extreme, but some people I know will often kind of nudge by like a couple of samples or milliseconds, so that a compressor could come on a little faster on like a low end source. But some people I know will just simply duplicate a track and take the delay time here, and this is going to be in milliseconds, and then ever so slightly shift it to get different types of effects, or to trigger compressors a little differently if the attack time isn't as fast as they would like. So that's another trick that some people will do. All right, so we had a question, any possibility of the developers allowing you to save like the studio connections, the VST or VST connections, depending on which version, for external instruments or external effects. And there's kind of different philosophies. I've kind of asked for just a global preset that you could save here, is one thing I've asked for a number of years. But it doesn't exist. And, I've had kind of philosophical discussions with some developers and product planning people. And I know some of the people in the past have felt that, they want the external effects to always be there in case you open up the project and then it won't sound correct if it's not kind of permanently defined. But I understand the desire to want to be a little more flexible with your I/O capabilities and routing. But I will definitely kind of reiterate that as a feature request again. I know people want a little more flexibility to just be able to, I'm using all my outboard gear. I'm using these connections for, headphone monitor cues. So, but currently there isn't one, but I'll definitely reiterate that for you. So someone wrote that they have an old guidebook for Cubase. Is there any any plans to publish a book on using Cubase 9, sort of like the book version of these YouTube videos? I think what a lot of people, what the momentum in the market is kind of leading to doing YouTube videos. We do have the documentation that comes with the program. You could download the full manual as well. But, some of the things that are very practical, probably how, one person would want to see a Cubase manual is different than, the next user or their best friend. So we're trying to offer as many like tips and tricks and kind of going through concepts through different YouTube videos. And it seems that a lot of people like those as opposed to documentation. And I understand that I still read documentation, and I'm still a fan of it. But if I could find not necessarily what a function does, but maybe a collection of practical applications of different functions to achieve a goal in a YouTube video, that's helpful. But any resource is kind of useful, but sometimes and that's why we have lots and lots and lots of tutorial videos available, and we do these sessions like Hangouts so you could actually get your particular question answered. So I don't know of any plans. There's always third-party companies that are doing books, but there's fewer books because people are doing videos, and there's kind of fewer published videos because there's so much content available on YouTube as well. So I think that's kind of where the momentum is going, but I understand the desire for printed documentation, and I still use it as a resource, and I have all the Cubase, Wavelab, Ondo, Hallian, manuals and Dorico directly on my Kindle, so I have quick access to it at any time as well. All right, so we had a question: is there a keyboard shortcut to mute all inserts on a particular channel? So let's go ahead and load up some inserts on this channel. I think there's a handy keyboard shortcut for that. So let's just add a series of so kind of within the channel strip itself on a particular channel. I think if you hold down Option, it could be Alt on PC, and click, you could reset the track. That's one option. I think if you click here, at that point you could just bypass all of the inserts on a particular track, or if you have, so that's a handy function to be able to bypass inserts. And within the full mix console, let me just open that up. Once we go to our full mix console here, there's also the ability to, if you option click here, you could bypass all the inserts in the project. But let's see if there's key commands for that. If I could only type, that'd be good. So it doesn't look like there's a key command, but let me just take a look through the mixer. Okay, so if you come here, you could bypass inserts as a key command under mixer, or bypass inserts on the main mixer. So there's available keyboard shortcuts directly for that. All right, so we had a question about rewiring Reason with Cubase. So let me just reread it. About efficiently rewiring Reason 9 to Cubase. So I always forget which one. I haven't used Reason in years. But one of them would need to be started first, and then with Rewire, we actually kind of were the first company that supported it. We kind of co-developed parts of it, I believe. You would just see kind of your Rewire host, and then you could pick and choose, and route, multiple channels directly from Reason and send MIDI directly into Cubase. So the two programs kind of run in parallel to each other. One of the things that can throw off people when using Rewire is that the other program, you have to save the document in both programs. So unlike a traditional VST instrument, where you save one Cubase document and all the settings for the instrument are automatically saved, with Rewire, it's still kind of synchronizing and transmitting like MIDI data and passing audio back and forth, but you still have to actually save it in your Rewire host like Reason 9, or save it in Cubase as well. So you have to save it in the host and slave. But it's pretty straightforward. If you're running 64-bit and maybe you have an older version, a lot of people run into issues because they have the 32-bit Rewire driver installed and not the 64-bit. So if it's not showing up or it's not seeing what you expect it to see, all you have to do is make sure that you have the 64-bit Rewire driver installed, and that should take care of it for you. All right, we had a question on a Cubase tool that kind of worked like the SPL Transient Designer. So we have a really great one actually called the Envelope Shaper. We'll take a look at that. So I'll just kind of start off, let's say a new just so let's say we'll just start off with just our drums here. All right, so one of the great things, and it's kind of, a lot of times people will think of it as kind of almost like an anti-suck plugin, and it's just called the Envelope Shaper, and it's under Dynamics. So I'll just lower this volume just here just a little bit. So you go to Dynamics, and this is like phenomenal tool on drums. So at this point, and you can think of this as like, here's our attack. I want it more length or release. So let's just add more length to it. And we bypass it. Or if you want to be kind of very tight. So a lot of times what people often spend hours trying to get in compression, you do very easily using the Envelope Shaper. So if you haven't played around with this, it's a gem. And the cool thing about the envelope shaper is it's also, when you go to a particular channel, is, you know, you could have it as an insert, but it's part of the actual channel strip as well. So when you go to the channel strip and you go under tools, at this point you have the envelope shaper, and you could have access to it there on every single channel, and you could even have a sidechain input for it. So it's a phenomenal plugin for drums. And I've seen people now kind of apply it on like a mix bus, even, you know, on bass, a lot of, you know, stuff just to kind of make drums really kind of pop in a mix. The envelope shaper is really great for that. Okay, we have a question. Will Cubase make a plugin that allows for band specific distortion? Again, Cubase was the first program that offered this. And when we want to, sorry about that. And now when we want to, and it's going to be called Quadrafuzz. So this is a pretty phenomenal hidden gem of a plugin as well. So let's come over here to our inserts, and we will now just kind of come directly here, and it's going to be under distortion, and we see Quadrafuzz. And this is originally, I think it was a Craig Anderton. It was a kind of a do-it-yourself project. I think he wrote maybe in like early Electronic Musician magazine, and he did the schematics, and we actually kind of created the plug-in version of it. But here you could have 4 bands of distortion, so you could, you know, easily just kind of come here and pick, you know, your different frequency ranges for each band. You have 5 different types of distortion, so you could have tape, tube, distortion, amp, and also I think it's Decimator. It's just kind of a cool name. And again, you could adjust width. You could also just come here and have delays going on. So if you haven't really played around with the Quadrafuzz, it's a pretty phenomenal plugin. So if you're wondering when we're going to have it, you probably already have it in your Cubase. So, and it was kind of interesting. It was kind of a plugin that kind of got discontinued for a while. And I remember my friend, the composer Paul Hasslinger, has done wonderful films like Underworld and TV shows like Halt and Catch Fire. His member Tangerine Dream. He was telling me that he was at the Steinberg office visiting when he was in Germany, and they asked him which particular plugin he wanted to see, and he's like, "Oh, the first one I want to see is the Comeback. You know, of all the plugins that they had, which one could they recreate? That would be cool." And his option was to come up with a Quadrafuzz, just to kind of help out other people, because he used that on so many projects that he wanted it back. So we kind of brought it back for everyone else as well. Okay, we got a question. Is there an export option that makes transferring project easier than bouncing and drop boxing? So, you know, there is, I don't think I have the license for it, but there is a VST Transit where you could take your project and load it directly into the cloud. There can be some, you know, limit. There is a certain amount of bandwidth that you could have per project. There's a number of different, you know, resources for sharing, like Dropbox. But, you know, check out the VST Transit. You get so much space for, and you can think of this as kind of an online project collaboration, and you could actually assign different people and invite different people to look at particular tracks. If you want someone to do vocal edits or record bass, and you could search for different users within the VST Transit. So check that out. But a lot of people will still use Dropbox or other different types of, you know, storage solutions as well. All right, so we had a question. What is the actual track count for Cubase at 96K or 192K? There really isn't. With the full Cubase, I don't think there is a fixed track count. I think there's some limitations, like you only have 256 effects channels, I think, and maybe 256 group channels. But I've seen projects. If you watch any of the Junkie XL videos, I mean, he's sometimes has. I think his opening template last time I was in his studio was like 3,200 tracks. So there isn't like a fixed number other of tracks. So if you have the computer to do it, you can kind of keep going on and on. So I've seen audio projects like in people's studios with 300 plus audio tracks going on at 96K, so, and composers sometimes doing 10 times that. Like a lot of composers will consider themselves to have a small template if they're at 7 to 800 tracks, because they like to have so much of their resources that they have available and kind of on and ready to go at any given time. Okay, so let's go back to some other questions. Thanks everyone for wonderful questions. All right, so just reading through some comments. So let's go through some of these. All right, so I have a question. Do I prefer Mac over PC, or do I just always use Mac? I used to always do the Google Hangouts on my Windows. I always carry both platforms with me. So like, in my computer bag, I have a MacBook Pro, and I also have a Music XPC laptop. Um, when I went to Windows 10 on the Music XPC laptop, and it's kind of a known thing. I haven't checked it recently, but I was doing the Hangouts all on Windows 10 for a long time, because that's my primary demonstration machine. But when working with the audio in Google Hangouts, it would start to degrade and get very distorted. And it took me a long time to figure out what it was, but it was ever since updating to Windows 10 that problem occurred. So that's why I kind of use Mac, but I go back and forth between Mac and PC. They're both great, and they both have their problems. But that's why I kind of use a Mac for the Google Hangouts, is the audio functions. And and some people, it's about a year and a half ago, when right after I switched to Windows 10, had Google Hangouts that the audio would be fine for like 15 minutes and then just kind of become very distorted. So I haven't looked at it in a while. Maybe it's been updated, but I don't want to subject everyone to that. So that's kind of why I use Macs. But I think both of the platforms are, they both have issues, and they both work really well. So overall stability, and I've been, doing this almost 26 years. It's been really, the computer hardware and platforms have gotten so much better compared to where we were, a couple decades ago. Okay, so we had a question on how do you choose what is sidechained from, and let me just kind of read this from the channel strip view. Okay, so let's add an audio track. And so once you go into, let's say we have our gate, compressor, And let's do the envelope shaper, say magneto, and a limiter. So we have a number of different, so the envelope shaper, the gate, and the compressor can have sidechain inputs. So as we work with this, so I'll just right click and we'll have this always on top. So if I added another audio track that I wanted to be used as the sidechain, at this point I could just do it once those side chains are active. Let me jump back to the other track and let me just activate these side chains. We'll select this track, and then in our destinations we will see audio 1, and we can see it kind of clearly labeled, audio channel 1, the strip, the noise gate, that's the side chain that will send to the side chain for the noise gate, for the compressor, and for the envelope shaper. So it's pretty clearly delineated that way. So should be pretty easy to figure it out. All right, I just think I may have missed one question. I'm going to just cycle back here just a little bit. Thanks everyone for the wonderful questions. Again, if you have questions as we're kind of going through different things, just feel free to pipe in and ask. Okay, so we had a question about when typing in a keyboard shortcut, will Cubase tell you in advance if it's assigned to something else? So when we go to the key commands, if you type in the key here, so let's say, oh, I want to use the letter J. So I would just kind of come here and then click J, and then that would automatically show me what function that particular key is set to. So if I come here and just click here, say, okay, what does G do? What does K do? And I know some people will actually just kind of learn keyboard shortcuts this way. Oh, what does the number 2 do? Oh, that selects the range tool. So that will show you. And if you try to assign it, you will get a little warning message here indicating that that keyboard shortcut's in use and may trigger 2 functions unintentionally. All right. So just go back through some more questions here. All right, so one point that was brought up, someone's complaining about, maybe allocating resources for, different cards. One of the great things that you can do is also, like, let's say, and I think that the example used was maybe like a UAD card. One of the great things you can do if you're finding that you're kind of hitting a brick wall, resource-wise, let me just play this, is using the direct offline processing. So if you come here, let's say I have a number of drum tracks, with 9.5, and you could do this some other ways, but 9.5 added direct offline processing. So if you have like a finite fixed number of resources, you could just hit the F7 key, and I selected all these files, and let's say I wanted to run them through like a tape saturation. I can now just come here and say, okay, let's go through Magneto. And now what it's doing, it's processing all those files as if it went through Magneto. And let's say I want to run it through my envelope shaper as well. So now, let me just tweak the envelope shaper settings. So if you wanted something like that, I mean, it's obviously way to the extreme for an example. But when I do this, it's processed the audio files and it's not taking any CPU cycles. And a lot of people in the past have shied away from this type of workflow because you couldn't necessarily undo it. You know, it's like sometimes unburning the steak. It could be very difficult, but here with the direct offline processing, even after saving the project, you could say, oh, I just wanted to, you know, remove the Magneto without removing the envelope shaper or vice versa. So, and you go, oh, you know, I wanted to actually remove, you know, different functionality here. I wanted to remove the envelope shaper or change the envelope shaper. So even after saving with the direct offline processing, that can make just a huge difference. So even after the project has been saved, like 20 years later, you could just simply open up that project and say, let's modify it, let's make it all permanent, or let's delete all the processing. And that way you could have like if you have like a UAD system where like I want to run this, one plugin, it kills all my DSP resources, you could just simply apply it offline in a very convenient manner. Okay, so we had a question. It was probably referring to how do we get that, when I opened up Groove Agent before, how to get to that little step sequencer. So the step sequencer is actually, I'll just add a MIDI track. Let's say I'll just add an instrument track here. Okay, so someone asked about how to do this, and this is like one of those, great things that people sometimes miss. But when you go directly to a MIDI track or an instrument track, you go to MIDI inserts, and then from there, it's called Beat Designer, and then that will just kind of pop up. So you could have this as your own, little step sequencer, and this could, synchronize directly with it. You could drag and drop. You could fill the left and right locators with the patterns. So all sorts of great stuff that you could do here. And you could have different patterns that can actually be triggered live from MIDI notes. So you could have, 4 octaves of different MIDI drum patterns here as well. So I'm just going to reread one quick question about, let me just quickly record a part here for this Groove Agent, as it may go directly into another question here that I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss. So what I want to do is we'll just go to the inspector here, and on this particular channel I want Groove Agent to be my MIDI output port. And then I'll just select a quick pattern here, and I'm just going to hit record. All right, so let's say if we have everything kind of mapped out to one particular Groove Agent. Let me just stop Groove Agent from internally playing. And we wanted to look at this particular part, and let's look at it in a drum editor. So I'm just going to reread this, so make sure I have this question correct. Okay, so it's okay. So I think I understand the question. So the question is, when you dissolve part, why does it automatically remap and create multiple instances of Groove Agent as opposed to firing it all off the same port? So let's take a quick look at that. So let me just, and here's a great trick that a lot of people miss. Like if I wanted my kick, snare, hi-hat, toms, open hat to be on different tracks, what I could do is just kind of come here under MIDI and choose dissolve part. And what I want to do is to separate pitches. All right. And what we've seen is kind of the same Groove Agent part kind of loaded up. And that was the question. So I'm going to just see, and what that's done is it's taken a kick, snare, hi-hat, all to different tracks. Let me just see if we get the same behavior on a MIDI track. So I'll just add a MIDI track. And let me just copy this. I'll just load up the same kit, and we'll see if it does the same thing on a MIDI track. So it looks like if it's done through an instrument track, that it will add the particular instruments that's kind of tied to it. But if it's done through a MIDI track, that at that point it'll dissolve and still have everything routed to the same destination. So I understand why that could be a little irritating behavior on the when using an instrument track. So I'll see if we can get I'll recommend perhaps adding a preference, so you can say, don't create new instruments or something like that. So, all right. So let me scroll back down. Sorry, I'm behind in all the questions. Thanks again for everyone's wonderful questions. We'll get caught up here. So we got some more time. So I see a question if we're about the use of the USB E licenser. I'm sure that I think that there, obviously, there's people that are doing research on to, different platforms for license management. I haven't heard of any timelines or any word with that. So I can tell you that, I travel, I probably do 100 plus flights a year. And I haven't lost my, I've had the same e-licenser since 2001. And I just always connected directly into a USB hub, and I don't have any problems, but I understand frustrations of the possibility of losing it. But, I just, I tend not to lose my keys or my wallet, and I kind of treat it the same way. But I'm sure that there's someone that's always looking into future licensing options. So when that'll be, I have no idea. But, that's probably, what we could say about that. So we understand if you're frustrated, and if you're doing a lot of travel, a lot of people will get a Cubase Elements that doesn't require the USB e-licenser as well. So some people will treat the Elements as kind of their portable version that's licensed to their particular computer, and then just simply leave their, if they have their studio machine, will just have the USB e-licenser there for travel. I see a comment on the envelope shaper, long release times on the envelope shaper is like a free reverb for everyone. Yeah, you could treat it that way. So it's always the classic, I want my drums to sound like John Bonham's in the session, and you want to tell the drummer to play like him. That'd be helpful, but you can kind of really get that sound very quickly with the envelope shaper in Cubase. So you see, question: why doesn't Cubase have, I think it's something like Ableton Simpler. I'm not familiar with that, but I think what someone is talking about is maybe the sampler track. So Cubase has a sampler track built in. So really, if you just wanted to kind of come here and let's say playback, let's say we have different content here, you could just right click and create a sampler track. Just like that, and it makes your sampler. And now and at this point I could also adjust my envelopes. So if I wanted to have audio warping, if I wanted to have different amplifier stages, and of course different types of filters, and you could just have your different filter control right here. So if you're looking for like a simple sampler, this is pretty easy. Even any audio file that's directly on your project window. So say if I just come here, or I have an audio file, I could just drag that directly in, and that's now my sample track. So if I want to take a vocal file here, let's say I just want to take this vocal file, drag it in, and let's say I'll just increase the volume here so you can hear a little better. And I want it to now come here, and we'll put it into like a tempo sync, and we can now just put it sync to tempo. So if I just want to even go to my chord pads, so I think if you're looking for a quick, easy, sampler, that the sampler track is super fast and easy. And one of the other cool things is you could just even select, let's say if I am in a part, I could double click, I could just do a quick range selection and say, oh, I want that part. And from the range selection tool here in the sampler editor, I could say just create a sampler track. And that way I could just do my sampler just that easily. So I think it's a great, if you're looking for a simple sampler that's part of Cubase, that it's hard to beat that. So it's really kind of helped so many people's workflow. All right, just reading through some other questions. Thanks for everyone's patience. We'll kind of get through all the questions as quickly as we can. Okay, I've just kind of jumped ahead in all my questions, so just getting caught up here. Sorry. All right, so we have a question. Is there a way in Cubase to use multiple audio interfaces to get 24 ins and outs? This is really kind of can be dependent upon the operating system. So within the OS X, you have an audio MIDI setup. So if you come here, it's a little easier to do an OS X, but if you go to under applications, you can see your audio MIDI setup. And then once you're in the audio MIDI setup, you could, if you click on the plus sign, you could create an aggregate device. And this would allow you to have multiple audio interfaces. Now, the problem is that the latency can be compounded. So a lot of people start wondering why it gets a little weird. And once you have that aggregate device set up, you could choose that as an option directly here in your studio setup. On the Windows side, it's kind of set up to use one ASIO driver because it will probably do a better job of clocking between the two different sources. So a lot of interfaces, like let's say like the Steinberg UR824 will have, 8 analog mic pre's, Class A D pre mic pre's. Which sound fabulous, and then you could have 16 channels of ADAT. So you could take like an Audient piece or another UR824 or an MR816 and kind of use those as converters to get 24 channels in. Some people on Windows will also use ASIO for All, which is kind of an ASIO driver that works with multiple Windows interfaces, and you could have multiple interfaces, but it's not the most stable system. So if you wanted to, stack multiple interfaces, OS X is a little better for that because it offers the aggregate devices. But again, latency can be compounded and clocking can be a little nebulous between the interfaces. And on the Windows side, you should just really kind of plan on getting an audio interface that has the expansion capabilities built in, because that will be kind of your better choice. And you get, different interfaces from RME, from Yamaha, Steinberg. There's also a number of Dante interfaces, which is a great option for expansion, where you could basically have all the audio pass over the network, over the Dante network, and you could stack different flavors of mic pre's and, get up to 128 channels of input and output. It obviously costs a little more. But so on the Windows side, it's you'd have to kind of go through an ASIO for All, which is probably not the best choice. And on the Mac side, you could just use an aggregate device. So seeing a question, can the Cubase USB key kind of work in conjunction with an RSA token and kind of work in with that, and that would free up a USB device? I have kind of the same USB limitations with, my, especially my new MacBook Pro that has 4 USB-C slots. It's really easy to spend, go to Amazon or, Best Buy or wherever you shop for any computer equipment and just get a USB hub for $5. So the USB dongles don't take much power. So I've actually, from one non-powered USB hub, I've run an iLock, an e-licenser, an audio interface, and a MIDI controller, all with one unpowered USB hub without any issues. So if you're worried about, a USB port, just simply, get a hub. They're really easy. They're compact. I get one that has the power, has a connector cable as part of the hub, so you don't lose that. It's super easy, to work with. And that's what I've used for 17 years. I've had, I think, 3 different hubs over the time. Okay, so there's a question about creating MIDI from monophonic sources and if I have any tips or tricks. Let me just open up another project here. Try. Our project has some audio in it. Sorry about that. Sorry if you could hear the dog next door barking. My neighbor just got home, let her dog out. Okay, let me see if this project opens up. All right, so let's say I just want to take maybe like a sax part here. Okay, and I'll just open this up into bigger. And let's go to our very audio. At this point, I'm just going to do my pitch and warp. So one thing that, let's go ahead and, if I wanted to turn this into, let's go ahead and we'll listen to it. And I don't think I have a, I'm just going to do another part that actually has tempo. try this one here. You know, one is if you have kind of a freely like a free tempo basis for the project, you know, making sure that you have the tempo map can make a huge difference. So let's say I'll just come here and I'll just kind of consolidate this real quick. So we have one part, and I've never done. Let me just we'll bounce a selection here. Place, okay. So now I'm just gonna double click and we'll go into, and we'll go ahead and just listen to this so you get an idea. Okay, I'll just a little louder. Okay, so let's say we'll just listen to this vocal here.
I know you're looking good. I'm in the neighborhood.
Okay, so now when I want to come here, I just go to my very audio. Let's take a quick look. And sometimes, you know, working with, you know, some of the,
I know you're looking good. I'm in the neighborhood.
you know, making sure that some of the, you know, when you have constant, like some of the segments,
I'm in the
you know, where you have a, maybe like just a little bit of the grit in a voice. You know, if you come here and, you know, making sure that you know, you could just kind of come here to actually select, and let's say we'll just do kind of our pitch transposit, you know, my quantizing of the pitch. And sometimes that will, you know, make a big difference in making sure that the segments are kind of making sense. So sometimes you may have like an attack of a note that's really just more of like a consonant.
I'm in the neighborhood.
So if we wanted to now just kind of take those two that we've done and let's convert it, and we'll extract the MIDI data from it. And often I want to use kind of the, you know, make sure that I'm using kind of the expression. So, you know, we could actually use kind of the VST 3 tuning curve, and we'll just put it, have our dynamic velocity. We'll take a look at how this looks. So, and if I was to kind of clean up a little bit and do just some quick appearance quantization. And I don't know what key we're in. Let me just guess A. So I will. So, you know, that could be a pretty reasonable you know, interpretation of that particular vocal part. But, you know, one thing that it could help is, you know, just kind of going through and cleaning up some of the consonants so that when you're working with it, that you don't have a kind of, you know, that's trying to indicate it where the pitch has been indicated much lower than usual. So, you know, just doing that will often help with the interpretation into MIDI stuff. Okay, so we had a question. Is there a way to visually adjust the noise gate on the waveform? So let's go ahead and take, we'll just use this as an example, our vocal file here. So I'm going to just come here, and I think this has changed from 9 to 9.5, but in previous versions, I think before the direct offline processing, that you could go to processes and see the noise gate here. And now in 9.5, it's actually just kind of showing it directly here. So if we go to our noise gate, so you don't get to see it kind of interact with it, but you might be able to kind of, if we do another approach, could be like, so I understand kind of the, it was kind of a handy thing to do. But I think if you go here to like detect silence, that you could, very easily just kind of come here, and it's not a noise gate, but here you can kind of see the threshold of exactly where you want stuff to kind of be chopped out, and you could adjust that threshold. So in essence, it could kind of do a very similar thing, but I think in 9.5, the offline processing for the gate is actually kind of moved to the plugin where you don't see it with the waveforms visually. I'm not sure why that it was changed, but it did in 9.5. So we have a question on any chances that the device panels will be kind of updated anytime soon. I haven't heard of any plans, but I generally don't hear of plans for product development until it's pretty far along. I think I might be going out to Germany next month in April, towards the end of April, so I may have a chance to ask them, but I haven't heard of any plans, or haven't seen, I haven't heard of anything of developments, but I'm probably not the best person to know that stuff, but I'll kind of pass it on to people who are asking about it. Okay, just reading a quick question about converting an audio track to MIDI. Okay, so I'm just reading about a question that says, recently I converted an audio track into MIDI and exported it to Groove Agent. And wrote in the MIDI note on a new track. And it says, when I automate mute on middle of the song, that the track starts from the beginning. So I don't know if you could tell me like how you're trying to do that, because one of the things that you could do in Groove Agent that's kind of cool is a lot of times you could just do slicing directly inside of Groove Agent. So let's say if I go here to, I'll just open up a Groove Agent SE. So I'll just go to my VSTI menu. So it seems like maybe there's one extra step that's going on. So, you know, what a lot of people, you know, what you could do inside a Groove Agent is, let's say I'll just drag this particular audio file, let's say the vocal here.
You're looking good. I'm in the neighborhood. I got some cheap wine. I know let's have a good time.
All right,
I'm in the neighborhood.
all right, so let's say
Promised you. I got some cheap wine. Let's have a good time. Let it be. I never promised you.
all right,
I'm gonna stick around.
just let this. And so what you could do is if you go to the slice menu here, you know, you could just simply kind of create slices and you could determine the threshold here. So let's say that's going to be your slices. And now, you know, these will just be kind of triggered. You know, so that might, so I'm not, if you could maybe whoever, let me just. So just at Quaver Love Studios, if you could maybe just reiterate what you're trying to accomplish through the task. I think, you know, instead of playing the note from Groove Agent, I'm not sure if you sliced it, but if you slice it, that slicing it in Groove Agent could probably make more sense. So, so if you could maybe reiterate it in the comments, and we can see if we can circle back to that. Okay, so we have a question. How can I get Cubase to save copies of WAV files if I import it more than once instead of referencing the same one? So there's a preference, and it's so it's going to be under editing, I think under audio. And then you'll have the setting right here on in. Basically, this is kind of with shared clip processing. So let's say if on import audio files, let me just, I think. That we could just say open options dialog box. So let's say if I now go to import an audio file. So, so this way you could have it automatically copy. Let me see. I think it's another setting. There's like some settings. I think it's called shared clip processing. Oh, okay, it's right here. I'm sorry. On processing shared clips. So you could have it open an options dialog box, create a new version, or process the existing clip. So let's say we had a. So I'm going to leave this to. Sorry about that. I realize it's so annoying. So I'm going to leave this to open options dialog box. So again, under editing audio, you'll have on processing shared clips. So I have, let's say, a WAV file that I've copied multiple times throughout a project. So let's say I have that drum loop, and I've now copied this multiple times. And let's say this one, I wanted to do some processing on it. So I'll right click and let's just say I wanted to do a fade in. So now once I have that particular function open, I'll get this dialog box presented to me. It says the project contains events that use the same audio material as event that's in this editor. Click new version if processing should apply this to new edited event. So this is one of those like settings that you often is on by default, and then as soon as you start working with it, you just say, oh, I don't want to see that window again, and the dialog goes away. So if I say new version, it's now processed, it's created a new audio file that's just that, and it won't affect the other files. So that will be treated independently, even though it's the same, referencing the same audio material. So again, go to your preferences, and under editing audio, on processing shared clips. And at that point, you can have your different settings there. So you can have it automatically create a new version, or process the existing clip, which could process each of those files the same way, which is probably something that you may not want to actually do, so you have a little more control. Seeing a nice comment that these videos only make me happier that someone randomly chose Cubase years ago. Yeah, it's a it's a miraculous program of depth and creativity, and it's I'm still learning new things every day with it as well. So yeah, it's so much fun. I still after using it for almost 27 years now, still enjoy it so much. And I look forward to every new release and booting it up for the first time, probably like you guys do. All right, so someone, I see a comment that someone's like, oh, I see this, you love the sampler track, but if it could turn into a full-fledged sampler in Cubase, that would be, great as well. So let's say if I come here, and let's say I have a particular, and I just drag this to, let's say I take that sound design element and if you needed to do more work with it, let's say, okay, I need to do more capabilities. One of the cool things is you could actually just say transfer to Groove Agent SE. So let's say I wanted to slice that. Now at that point, it'll take that sample and automatically load it directly into Groove Agent SE, and then I could choose to slice directly there. Conversely, if you have the full Hallian, and I know everyone would love to have a Hallian with Cubase, but if you have the full version of Hallian, you could also, if you're starting off as a sketch and you say, okay, now I want to publish and make my own instrument based on this, I'm so inspired, you could also transfer it to PatchShop Pro or transfer it to Hallian. And now when I do this, it will see that my VST instrument will get loaded up, Hallian will get loaded up, the audio file will automatically carry over. And now once I go to edit and we'll look at this mapping, I could just see directly into Hallian as well. So, obviously everyone wants more features in the host application, but you can do additional functionality with the sampler track. So if you're real quick and dirty doing something, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, it'd be cool if I could do this, you can take it to the next step. If you have the included Groove Agent SE, or if you had the Patch Shop Pro, or taking it to the full Groove Agent and full Hallion. So that allows for a lot of flexibility and great options. So just seeing a question, why is Hallion 6 not on the top 50 VST synths list? Everyone's lists are different, and sometimes it could be that, different people that make lists get, include plugins that were provided free, but, Hallion, just won the the Electronic Musicians Editor's Choice just a couple months ago. So it's been recognized in a lot of different places. All right, so a question about kind of input metering. Let's take a quick look at it. Saying that it seems different from like a 3 dB difference. Maybe it could be set to panning law. We'll just give it a shot here. And let me add an audio track. Okay, just let me. Okay, so let's say I just want to we'll reread this real quick. I'll just put a test tone oscillator on. Okay, so saying the input channel shows 3 dB louder. So we'll go to tools. And I'll just make this, let's say, minus 24. Okay, let me. So make sure I have this done correctly. All right, so I think I should hear the test tone here. having a brain cramp. Sorry about that. Let me just... Okay, so we have this at minus 12 dB. We will now have this audio track. So let me... Okay, so it's minus 12 dB there. All right, so I'm just going to reread the question, make sure I'm understanding it. Okay, and then let me send this to a group. Okay, may not... Let me see if I send it to a group here real quick. See if that gets it there. May not until it's... You try just recording to this and playing back. All right, so let's see what happens if we now play this back. Okay, and I'll just turn that down. All right, so I think what this could be maybe attributed to is the pan laws. So if we go to your project menu, and let's go to project setup. Let's see if we set this to equal power, what happens? See if this changes it. Yeah, I'm not sure why there's discrepancy, but I think it's going to be related to pan laws. I could play around with it a little bit more afterwards. And if you want to email me at clubcubase@steinberg.net, I can play around with it some more. But I think I'm seeing what you are, and I think it's going to be related to pan laws. All right, so I've seen a question that says Cubase 9 is supposed to remember my primary audio interface, and but sometimes when I'm plugging in my secondary device, Cubase switches to the generic audio interface. Why? Sometimes when Cubase doesn't see the interface when it's booting up, what it can do is it's going to try to route audio somewhere, and it will try to route it to your generic audio. And there's some weird behavior I've seen with Core Audio, and I think this is on the Mac platform from indicating with the question. But also, I've seen some people get kind of corrupted if the computer falls asleep with a display that has HDMI that passes audio, that could kind of disrupt it. But I've always found that if once I start Cubase with the same interface on my Mac, that it always catches it. So, but make sure. Sometimes I've seen people on the forums think that it's maybe related to like the computer going to sleep and some audio interfaces not waking up in time, especially if there's an HDMI connection that could also pass audio. So that could be something to look into. Seeing a comment that one reason for Halion 6 is that there's only no VST 2 in OS X anymore. Yeah, there's within OS X you still have VST 2 and VST 3 plugin support. All right, so we had a question about using effect returns in a surround environment. So let's go ahead and set up some of our audio connections to do this. So I'm going to just create a 5.1 output. Okay, and what I want to do is to take this particular audio channel, and I want this channel to be routed to the 5.1 out. And now I also want to add an effects channel. And this effects channel, when I add it, I'm going to choose where, you could have your effects channel be any type of channel configuration. So instead of just being stereo by default, I want this to be a 5.1, and we'll just do a verb, like our revelation. Okay, so now I go to this particular audio channel. Let's open up, and we go to our sends, and I want to send this to revelation. And now as soon as I come here, we can see that this is the 5.1. Sorry about that. This is the 5.1 for the channel itself. But now, if we go to our send, and we go to panning here, and we double click, you can now adjust that reverb to be, in your 5.1 field as well. And if you wanted that reverb to only be in particular channels, again, you can come here to the effect return, and let's say now I want that effect to be in 5.1. So let me just go back to our channel, and as we come here, you could have that. But now when you go to the panner for the effects channel, and this is now our effects channel, you could come here and just bypass particular channels if you wanted to. So I think it's, I forget what the keyboard shortcut is, but you could bypass particular channels. Say, I don't want it in the center. So that's how you do your 5.1 panning of different effects. So seeing some people expressing thanks, we're showing them all this stuff. So it's my pleasure. Glad to be able to help you guys through all of your creative processes with Cubase. So. All right, just reading through some different comments, and we're getting to some further questions. All right, just scrolling through. Sorry, overpass one down to the bottom, cycling back. Give me just a second. Sorry about that. Okay, just reading through some comments, and thanks to everyone for a great discussion. Hope everyone's learning a couple tricks. All right, so seeing a question probably about doing MIDI CCs with curves, I think. So let's say if I just add a MIDI track, like I was working with my friend Daryl Pearson, he couldn't figure out something where he wanted to do in like a pitch bend for as a groove agent for kind of a particular drum programming effect. So just load up a Groove Agent SE, and what my friend Daryl wanted to do was to actually trigger particular like pitch bend for Groove Agent SE, but he wanted to do it kind of with the new automation that was introduced in 9.5. So he wanted to do all of the curves. So let's say if you wanted to just come here, so you wanted to kind of do all of the cool curves, like, you know, your like this, but just kind of for pitch bend. And he could do it for volume and audio, but he couldn't figure out how to do it for pitch bend on Groove Agent. So if you wanted to do this for other instruments, really all you'd have to do is click on more. And then when you come here, just go to Groove Agent SE. And then I think if you just go, you'll see kind of and now you could just kind of select pitch bend here. And now you could just kind of freely draw in your pitch bend and do all of your Bezier curves just like that. So you could do that basically for any MIDI controller. So I know some people are upset that they couldn't do this type of curves in the MIDI continuous controller editors, but you could just simply do it in the automation. So it's very, very easy to work with. Okay, so we had someone wants to take a guitar part and like a mono guitar part and have the effects in the opposite speaker. So I think I actually have this done in one particular project. So it's a great kind of move from like 80s hard rock stuff where you wanted to have the guitar pan to one side and its effects pan to the opposite side. So we'll show you how to do that. Okay, so I think in this example, we're going to have so kind of two classic guitar parts here. So one's in the right channel, and yours in the left channel. So really all you have to do is when you come here, let's say this guitar will be panned. We'll just have this guitar. Let me just make sure I have this set up right. All right, so I'm going to add an effects channel. So let's say I want my reverb. Okay, so I've got one stereo revelation reverb. So we'll go ahead and just solo this track. And then when I go to my panning, I just click here. Then I could have this guitar panned here and pan my effects end all the way to the right. And So when you click here, you can see destination, but now you could just click and you could pan that stereo effect anywhere that you want. So if you want to play this, so that way the only, the panning can be independent on each cue send directly there. So that's a really handy thing to be able to do. And so just click right here in the channel strip in the lower right hand corner and click on panning. Then that send can be panned independently. So I'm seeing a question, is it possible to use the space designer from Logic inside of Cubase? I don't think so. I think that's kind of tied to the particular application. So if you tell me what type of plugin Space Designer is, I don't know if it's like a convolution reverb, but what you could do, if it's a convolution reverb, you could just use Reverence. I'm just kind of guessing from the name. And this is our convolution reverb that you could actually import any standard wave file directly into the system as well. So you could have full convolution reverb with loading in your own particular impulses if you so desire. So I'm seeing questions for a lyric track. I proposed that for the last several years, so I continue to kind of fight for it. But yeah, I see the need for a lyric track, and I always kind of pass it on as my personal feature suggestion, but it hasn't been implemented yet. But as someone else had mentioned, you could have lyric tracks as part of MIDI. As part of the MIDI score or as part of MIDI information. But one thing that I see some people will do is to literally have, they just will take their marker track. So let's say if I add another marker track, and then we could just call this lyric. So I've seen some people do. Then as you come in here, you could just kind of drop in a marker, and in the comments field, let's just say, okay, now I insert a marker, and you could just type in and people will just kind of type in the lyrics that way, so it's on the project window. So I've seen some people do that as kind of a way, so especially if you're working with a singer, you could say, okay, we're right here, this is the chorus, or you're going into the bridge. At this point, you could just say, okay, we're going to, and what you want to do is, okay, you just want to drop the marker in and say, when you go to this line, and because a lot of times singers will know, you just go, okay, just go to this line in the lyrics, and you could have that kind of on your project window so that you can just rattle off the lyrics to different parts of working with the singer that way. So I know people do that and just kind of use lyric tracks, and if they want to see everything, they could just have this expanded out, and you can see at this point in time whether you're doing bars and beats a minute, or if you're doing different types of functions for at this time code, or you say second verse, second chorus, and you could have one marker track that's just dedicated to lyrics, one it's doing song structure, one it's for potential edits. So a lot of people I've seen do that quite, very easily. So I see a question: how do I better mix in dog barks with my YouTube videos? Like, make sure your neighbor has several dogs. It's a good place to start. All right, so I see a question: could Cubase basically have a chord, with dealing with the chord track and have that tied directly into the key so that you know which particular chords fit within the key? Um, and just an easy way to kind of test in different song keys. I could pass that on, and maybe it could be something like a different color preference, or where it would be perhaps non diatonic chords could be maybe a bit demurred in color or visibility, but still available. It's like one of those things. It gets to be an interesting topic of design philosophy of, should we, we don't want to necessarily limit someone from, like, like the Beatles were classic. And sometimes when you think of a major four chord, that they would just switch it to a minor chord. And, they obviously did very well. Like, Let It Be is a great example of that, where you expect in a major key that the 4 and 5 chords would be major. So we don't want to necessarily predispose people to only working that way and discourage them from exploring other chord and harmonic options. But I can see where it could be useful for people to have them kind of highlighted in a particular way. So I'll pass that on. Okay, so seeing a question, can you have the click track? Uh, can we automate the click track to turn off at a specific time? I don't know a way of doing that, but one of the things that you could do is, let's say I had a signature track here. So I'll just come directly here. We have a signature track, and we can see that we're in 4/4 time. And so if I wanted to turn on my click, let's say before everything kicks in here. So let's say I have my click being routed out, so I could just turn my click on here. Now, one of the great things in Cubase 9.5, I will just kind of select, if you select all, or I have my left and right locators kind of set up. If you go to the signature track here, you could say render audio click between locators, between left and right locators. And then what that'll do, here's our audio click track. that's now been rendered. So if I just solo this, and we'll turn off our click by hitting the letter C. So now it's an audio file of the particular click track here. So if you wanted to automate it to drop out at a specific point, you could just simply take, I'll just turn my snap on by hitting the letter J, and say I didn't want it in these bars. I could choose to either mute the event or simply erase the event. So while it's not automating it, you could just, but this is also now going through the click track as an audio file, and you could automate that track or just mute or cut out different events. So while the click track can't be automated, you can print it with one mouse click and mute, and you have a lot of flexibility with that. So, and there's a second part to the question we'll get to next. It was, can Cubase export more than one file type at a time? I think it's going to be doing only one file type at a time. We have our WaveLab program, and WaveLab can actually do a multi-export because, for mastering engineers, often they're delivering to multiple file formats, like, for iTunes, for Amazon, for Spotify, for CD, for an HD release. So that could automatically do that as well. And with it, if you have WaveLab, you could also have it function as you could set up something called a watch folder. And what the watch folder will allow you to do is to designate a particular folder, and it will execute a batch process for you. So you can say that every time I saved my file, I do my audio mix down, and I save it to a particular folder that's a watch folder with WaveLab. And WaveLab doesn't even actually have to be open to do this, that it will automatically take all the files in that folder and convert it to multiple file formats for you. So while Cubase doesn't have it, WaveLab has some great functionality that could easily carry over to Cubase through saving it to a watch folder. But currently you could do one file format at a time. Okay, so I have a question about the new. So someone asked my opinion of the questionnaire that Steinberg has generated just in the last couple days, and there's questions about different content options, different content, or questions also about subscription models. So the reason and how Steinberg has implemented feature sets and how Steinberg has implemented a lot of the things that comes through is through these surveys. It's a very quantifiable thing. So if someone actually, if you have data that says, and we did surveys earlier on subscription models, and it was I think it was pretty overwhelmingly that people didn't want a subscription model. So it's a way for you to express what you want to Steinberg. I personally like owning software and not subscribing to it. Some people would like to subscribe or a rent to own option, and Steinberg is just trying to figure out what the customers want. So so that's why we're doing that, to collect that data. But I haven't heard of any I haven't heard of anything of switching models, but there's a lot of companies that are doing it, but I haven't heard of anything along those lines. So, that's my personal opinion, and that's what I expressed when I submitted my survey response, and everyone should submit exactly how they feel about the issue. So these surveys aren't a kind of predetermined, it's not a survey that's trying to back up a predetermined decision. They're looking to make decisions based on this survey input. So that's why it's really critical for you guys to participate, and the people that participate have a really strong voice with features that are implemented and directions of how you guys want to see content. So, take the time and answer the survey as you see fit, as what you want it to be, and that's what that survey, that's the intention of that survey. All right, so we had a question, how do you cut all the audio tracks at once with the scissors? I'll show you a couple of tricks. All right, so one way is if you just select all the events, you can just cut all the parts like that. So if you don't have events selected, now if you have these events in a folder track, one thing that's very handy, so say I just right click and move selected tracks to folder, I could cut the folder just like that. So those are some handy ways of cutting multiple tracks at once. You could also, I think, do, if you go to the edit menu, I think maybe under range, if you have like the range tool selected, you could also just take that and let's say go to range. You could also just choose to, crop. So there's some different range editing options there. So once again, you get a range and split. So, and then that would, whatever tracks that you have on that particular range. So if I have 5 tracks selected, right click, go to my range, and just say split, I'll split only those particular tracks. So I see a question, is it possible to have the fader the same color as the track from the track colors? Currently, it's kind of set up where they're different faders depending on different track types. So there's been a lot of feature requests where people want like the whole channel, like when going into a larger mix console, to carry over this color. I know that the developers and product planning managers are aware of that as well. So, but currently it's kind of different colors indicate different types of tracks. So if you add a MIDI track, we'll just do this. So, when you add a MIDI track, that's a different color. When you add an effects channel track, different color. When you add a VCA fader, green. So we don't have anything routed to that VCA, so that's why we don't see a fader cap. But so different types of tracks will be different fader colors, and that's kind of the intention of it. So So I see a comment, if I was the boss of Steinberg, I would have a website with different macros and templates set up. So some of the, I do a Q&A series of videos that are on the Steinberg, on the, like the Cubase YouTube channel and Wavelab and Instruments. And for some of the macros, I did a minimize breath macro. So one of the things that we did is we actually uploaded my profile and my key command. So if you look in some of those things, you can, there are times when we do a video and it's like, okay, if you don't want to create this macro on your own, that where you could actually just simply download a particular one. But if you have particular macros and stuff like that, I could see if we could get kind of a repository of different macros, but let us know exactly what you want to do with macros, and we could perhaps start collecting them and have that as a resource that you guys could download and incorporate directly into your workflows. All right, so we see a question: is it possible to use the chord recognition for audio tracks? Currently, it's set up to do the chord recognition for MIDI parts. It's not really set up to do direct. It's not set up to extract the chords from audio events. And there's a lot of times you could go to, if you're doing like a song, that if it's a cover version of a song, sometimes you could go to like different websites that will have those. But if someone just kind of came in and played chords, it's not going to automatically kind of extract the chords. Some tools have attempted to allow you to do that, but it hasn't worked so well, and the quality could be a little subjective. Okay, so we have a question about punching in. Is there a way to toggle the monitor button so that you're only hearing what you punch in? What I would suggest doing, I would try this, and it's like the first thing I always do every time I start Cubase, is one of the preferences. I think this will do the trick for you if you go to VST. So preferences to VST. And there's an auto monitoring. It's kind of set up for manual by default. Try just doing tape machine style. And I think that will just solve that for you. It'll kind of work as you kind of would anticipate or hope it would. So try tape machine style monitoring. And that way when you do the punch in, you don't hear the track until it's recording, and then it's monitoring what it's punched in. And then when it punches out, you hear the pre-existing track without having to manually adjust the monitoring. So again, go to your preferences, to VST, and go to tape machine style, and that should do the trick. So I'm seeing about dealing with patch scripts for different instruments. Is there a way to insert it by name? It's kind of set up to, I know like some early versions, like 20 years ago, a Mac would allow you to do that. But it's really like when you're doing it in Cubase, you see the kind of the patch script. So let's say I have a MIDI track, and once you kind of have the patch script set up, you could do it from the inspector, but not necessarily inserted in a list editor or a MIDI editor. So seeing question, can you use external keyboards and see your patch name scripts? Yeah. So, once you have your VST instruments and some of the Yamaha consoles and, your Yamaha keyboards do this very well. You could actually open up an editor, but, once you kind of have this set up, what you could do is, say you go to your studio setup, no, I'm sorry, it's going to be under your external instruments, under your audio connections. And say you add an external instrument. And then when you click on associate MIDI device, you could actually kind of come here and deal with kind of all your, and once you have that set up, you could have it see your patch name scripts as well. I don't have any patch name scripts installed in my MacBook here. All right, so seeing someone that has the listen bus turned on, but it can't switch it off when the channel strip is open or when the channel view is open. So let me just. So I think that's the window you're talking about. So it seems to work for me. If you want to send me a project at clubcubase at steinberg.net, I'd be happy to take a look at your project if you want. You don't have to send any audio files. Okay, so I was seeing a comment to be able to index or do the auto CC or closed captioning for indexing. So I'll see if we could get that turned on for this video. All right, so I know we have a few questions left. Let me just see if I could get one last question. I'm going to have to wrap up. I'm going to have to go pick up my son from school. All right. So with that, I know there's still a couple questions. I want to thank everyone for the wonderful questions and great comments and discussion. If someone, again wants to do the index, I'll see if we could turn on the closed captioning mode on a video that someone had mentioned before. If that'll make it easier. I hope everyone has learned a couple new tips and tricks. We'll probably do the next one. I think 2 weeks from today, I'll be in town. Before heading to the Game Developers Conference in San Francisco. If you have questions that you want answered in the future, please send them to clubcubase@steinberg.net. If you like the Hangouts, please feel free to leave a nice comment. If you want to subscribe to the channel, you'll be notified of future Hangouts. But once again, I want to just thank everyone for the great questions. It's always a joy talking to and interacting with so many people throughout the world. It's a real pleasure for me. So with that, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. We've gone a little over 3 hours, and we hope that everyone has a wonderful day, and we'll see you guys next time.